Okay.
Hello, and welcome to another day with music therapy on the tools for perseverance. I'm Jen Townsend, and I'm happy to share with you a little bit more as we walk through this process of understanding our emotions and what we do with them, especially in a time when emotions can be really high. So I've presented this image of a person on their surfboard out in the middle of the ocean, looking around, trying to find the waves, trying to find the right wave to ride, trying to understand what to do with that wave. When do I get up? When do I, what's the safest moment? What am I going to be most successful at? Which wave is it that I'm going to take a risk on? Because I want to move from this looking at the emotion and trying to find the emotion to moving through the emotion to a feeling state and so on and so forth. Um, so far this week, we've talked about identifying and acknowledging our emotions. Um, we heard about naming it to tame it. We heard about recognizing the emotion and spending time with it. So I'm going to move forward into why we need the feeling of it. Sorry, I'm having a hard time getting my slide to progress. There we go. So this image shows us a series of four states or four the process of feeling emotion. And oftentimes in our lives, we think that emotion and feeling are the same thing. We think that state and mood are kind of the same thing. And in reality, each of these things is very separate from each other, and they're dependent on each other or interdependent, but they are not necessarily the same. So I first want to just define them for us. So an emotion is a chemical release. It's something that we don't have control over. It happens to us, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's completely out of our control. The best example I have from my personal life of this is that I have an extreme startle reflex. So I get startled even in my home with my own family multiple times a day. My husband startles me consistently. That is an emotional chemical release. I just get scared. I just nervous. Something happens. I don't know. But that's an emotional chemical release. Feeling lasts a little bit longer, whereas emotion is very short term, usually a matter of seconds. Feeling comes just after that, and it's the integration of the emotion and some of the sensation that we have. We start to have some awareness when we're in the feeling state, and we have an opportunity in the feeling state to control the perception of the emotion. And so feeling is a little bit longer. It's how I take in that startle. Am I going to be angry with my husband because he knows I have a startle reflex, and he could have flashed the lights, or he could have knocked on the wall telling me he was coming around the corner. He could have done something. He knows that I have a startle reflex. I could be really angry at him about that. Or I could add perception to the emotion that says, gosh, how silly of me that I would startle so easily. I know I do this. It's just hilarious at this point that we have this ongoing fun in our family of startling mom or startling Jen. Right. And so I've used my perception to change the emotion. And so what's important about that is that if we don't identify the emotion, if we don't know what the emotion is and accept it and validate it, then it's very difficult to add perception to it. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide when we get into some things that we can do to walk ourselves through this process. But then the state of being is kind of where I come from my feeling into a state of being. So I've had this emotional response that was short-lived and highly triggered. Then I've had some feeling, and I've had some time to put some perception into it. So now it leaves me in a state of being. So if you have a really fearful experience where you do go into fight or flight or freeze, then afterward you kind of have this, we sometimes call it the adrenaline rush. it's kind of the state of where you are then after this experience, right? And so if my feeling was being angry at my husband because he startled me, then my state might be that I'm just in a foul mood now. I'm just like, ugh, I'm just kind of this, my state of being, my physiologic response, the way I feel internally is in a bad place, like mean, just kind of ugly. I don't feel like engaging nicely with others. If I think of the startle reflex as something that's kind of humorous and I can laugh at myself about it, then I'm much more likely to move into a state of contentment, of life is okay. Um, these kind of movements. And so if I walk then from the bedroom where my husband startled me and I got angry at him, and then I walked into the playroom where my son was playing Legos, and he built this amazing tower, but he did it in the very center of the room so that there were Legos spread across the entire playroom and out into the hallway. My state might give me a new behavioral response that is being angry at my son, right? And so sharing my anger from my feelings into my state so that I yell at my son. You know that you're not supposed to play with Legos in the middle of the floor. We bought you this Lego table specifically to keep your Legos on. They really hurt when I step on them. Clean this up right now. To which my son is going to have an emotional reaction, short-lived chemical release of fear, anxiety, whatever, right? And then his perception of that is, mommy's really mad at me, this is a horrible day, and his state. You see how the ripple effect happens there? So the idea is that my state then has some impact, starts to have some impact on others if I let it out. But my state could have been that I chose to laugh at myself and think that this was funny. And so when I came into the room and I saw my son building this amazing Lego tower, I was more likely to say, whoa, what an amazing rocket ship you've built. This is incredible, and I love seeing your creativity. I'm wondering if you might be able to keep it over here with the Lego stuff so that none of us step on it. That might really hurt. To which his emotional response is, wow, mommy really loves my creation, right? His emotion is happy. His feeling is, his perception of that is, mommy really loves my creation. Ooh, maybe I should clean this up. He's able to integrate that information a little bit more because now we're maintaining a connection between our reptilian brain and our higher order thinking brain. So all of those things then bring my entire environment and being into a mood, an area of mood. So now there's a mood in my home that could either be an angry mood where everyone's just biting each other's head off and being really short with each other, or the mood in my home could be one of playfulness and creativity and communication among each other. So there's a really clear ripple effect that takes place from the state of emotion through to our mood, and how that can react to others and respond to others. And so one of the things that we need to embrace when we're having high emotion is, what do we do with this green square, this feeling square, and how do we grow our perceptions during that time? I think it's important to note that between emotion and feeling, that is the connection. So when we have an emotional response, that chemical release, that is all in our reptilian brain. Audrey talked about our reptilian brain a little bit earlier this week when she was talking about the amygdala and the emotion center of the brain. When we do that, another phrase coined by Dr. Siegel is flipping your lid. When we have that emotional response, we flip our lid. That means that we're not really connected to higher order thinking. We're not able to use our judgment skills, our executive functioning. We're just in that emotional state of response and trying to survive. So when we start to put feelings in, that's when we're reconnecting. We're building our ladder back into our higher order thinking so that we can embrace the emotion and move through it. So some of the ways that we could do that, some things that you all could try, is first, like we've been talking about, we have to identify the emotion. Identifying the emotion is really difficult. We talked about name it to tame it earlier this week, and name it to tame it it's a great tool. It's wonderful. And it's also difficult to name the emotion in the moment. And so I want to validate that for everyone, if you're finding that you're trying to utilize this exercise and it's really difficult to name the emotion, that's normal. And that's because you're not connected. Remember, we're not connected to our higher order thinking. And so we don't have access to our verbal responses in that moment. So it can be very difficult. And that's why we encourage the use of music or creativity, drawing, art. But something creative is more accessible to our reptilian brain, and so we can actually rebuild the ladder faster to our higher order thinking to start to get into that feeling and perception state. But some of the things that we've talked about throughout the week and previous weeks on this Tools for Preservation recordings have been the psychosomatic responses you might feel. So getting a headache, feeling nauseous, feeling extra tired, those kinds of things. And then there are physiologic responses that you may feel. My daughter was recently in Tinkerbell, the play, and there's this great line that Tinkerbell says when she's talking about Wendy, and she says to the audience, people think that I was jealous of Wendy, but I wasn't jealous of her. I loathed her. Do you know what loathing is? It's this deep, dark sensation in the back of your head. That's a physiologic explanation of loathing, right? And so she was able to name it by giving it all of these words, that physiologic response. So we may have physiologic responses. So it's important to do this kind of body check-in, like John showed us earlier this week. What am I feeling in my body? And maybe that's a way for us to identify the emotion and start to name it. And then there are behavioral responses. Am I being short with my loved ones? Am I just angry about things? Am I kicking things out of the way instead of picking them up and moving them? So I want to encourage people to have some creative identification of their emotions. And so we've given you some of those skills already this week, but one more is that you could think, if you don't have access to listen to music or whatever it may be, a quick way to maybe help you name an emotion is to first think, what would this sound like? What would this feeling that I'm feeling right now, what would it sound like? Would it sound like thunder? Would it sound like water dripping? Please go to the other room. Please go to the other room. Stand, sit, and lay down. I apologize. The joys of working from home. What would it sound like? So giving the emotion something that you hear, or that it would sound like, could help you to start to analyze it a little bit. And that's kind of the next step. Once we've had some initial identification of the emotion, we can spend some time with that emotion, like Sarah had us do when we did some songwriting earlier this week. Spend some time in the emotion, dissect it, really start to look at it, and then once you've started dissecting it and saying, this emotion is because of a startle reflex that I have, this kind of fear response that just automatically happens. Let me think through that. Does that come from somewhere? Is there something I can change from behind it, from where it comes from, or what might it be related to? A creative response is, how could the sound that I identified before, how could that morph into a new sound? So if I don't have words, I can just think of sounds, right? And so, oh gosh, this is like thunder. Every time this happens, it's like a clap of thunder that takes place. And what I'd really love to hear, I love to hear the rain on the tin roof. That's much more soothing, and I really love that sound. And so that's where I want to be. What perceptions do I need to put into place to help me move that emotion into that feeling state of the rain falling on the tin roof? That's calming and a brighter sound for myself. And those sounds are going to be different for each person. It's very individualized, right? And then finally, allow that perception to help you move through the emotion. So accept that the emotions are out of our control. Accept that we control our perception. So I do have a choice in how I perceive that emotion. And if I give it some time, that emotion some time, and really think about it, I might determine that it's not as scary as I thought it was. I'm not in as much danger as I thought I was. Or maybe I really am in danger and now I'm able to problem solve and make a plan to get myself out of it. And then thirdly, we want to accept that we have control over our action that comes out of that feeling. So maybe in the emotion state, I had a behavior that was very negative. I lashed out at my son. I took that emotion state, I moved through it very quickly. I didn't give it a whole lot of perception, and my state and my mood led me to yelling at my son for having his Legos all over the house. Well, I have control over my actions, and I can go back, even though I've already gone through it, I can go back and still add perception to that emotion, and I can go back and apologize for getting angry and explain that I let my emotion get to me in this way. And so I can teach others. My ripple effect can actually teach others through my own actions of how maybe I go back and fix the emotion. And by doing that, we start to train ourselves to spend more time giving perception to the emotion and moving through emotion so that we can get to a place where we actually can cope and can utilize some of these other coping skills that we've come up with. So that's in a nutshell the process of moving from emotion to a mood, and some of the ways that you might do that creatively. Thank you.